you very much, Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to be following the honourable member for North East Somerset and the erudite constitutional perspective he set out for our edification. And of course it is the case that there are wholly honourable reasons for wanting to leave the European Union. The problem, however, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we will pay a heavy economic price for leaving. Too many jobs will be forced out of the UK, and for that reason I shall be opposing the bill at its second reading tomorrow. We were told during the referendum campaign that leaving... yes, of course I'll give way.
The prediction that the honourable gentleman makes that jobs will be lost follows the prediction made by so many that staying outside the single currency would lead to economic decline, and indeed that the vote on June the 23rd would trigger an instant recession. Those predictions were wrong then. With respect to the honourable gentleman's integrity, why should we believe those predictions now?
Well, I think it's absolutely clear there will be a heavy economic price, and within a couple of years that will be absolutely clear. And my view is that in this House, if we believe this measure is contrary to the national interest, we should vote against it. And we've heard a couple of speeches now from members opposite saying in terms they think this bill is contrary to the national interest. In my view, if that is the view of members of this House, we should be voting against the bill. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his opening words, and can I agree with him that I believe it will make our constituents the poorer, and that is why I will join him tomorrow in the lobby. But can I say to him, isn't it a pity that part of the debate was to basically ignore what experts were saying about the destination of our country should we leave the European Union?
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. I think we should pay attention to those who know what they're talking about. I mean, the reality is our currency has fallen significantly in value following the referendum. That means that we are poorer than we were before. That's already happened. But the real damage is going to be when jobs start to be forced out of Britain, as they will be, I'm afraid, over the next few years. Now, some I know will argue that the loss of jobs in Britain will be a price worth paying in the short term for a better long-term future. I don't agree with that view, Mr Deputy Speaker. The fact is we will always be dependent on close partnerships with other countries. I cannot share the view that we'd be better off replacing annoying interference from Brussels with annoying interference from Washington. But that appears to be what some people believe we should be now heading towards. I'm afraid I won't be able to give way again. But in any case, we mustn't dismiss short-term job losses over the next few years as unimportant. The Prime Minister rightly aims for barrier-free access to the single market. The problem is that without signing up to at least some version of free movement, she stands no chance whatever of getting barrier-free access to the single market. And in this House, we need to be frank with people about what the prospects are for us over the next few years. And we've heard, for example, just in the financial sector, and many of my constituents, as those of my honourable friend, work in the financial sector in the City of London. Just in that sector alone, one study suggests 70,000 jobs being lost. And there will be that scale of damage in other parts of the economy as well. In my view, that is much too high a price to pay. I agree with those who say that the various forms of so-called soft Brexit wouldn't solve the problem, because we would then end up having to apply all the rules that were devised in the EU without having any influence at all over what those rules would be. I think that is not a viable position for the UK in the future. I think the one glimmer for a Brexit without the economic damage I'm concerned about would be if we signed up not to the current version of free movement of people, but to free movement of labour, where EU citizens could come to the UK if they had a firm job offer in the UK. I think this, as I understand it, this is how things worked in the common market in the past. That would, I believe, if we were to agree something along those lines, buy us a good proportion of the barrier-free access to the single market that the Prime Minister says she wants. But she seems to have set her face against that concession on immigration policy that would be needed, and we would therefore pay the price. And I must say, I think it's very strange that our future economic well-being is being relegated to the importance of reducing net migration to the tens of thousands. The Prime Minister was Home Secretary for 6 years. In that time, non-EU net migration, which we completely controlled, is nowhere near the tens of thousands. Last year it was 150,000, and of course all the EU net migration was on top of that. The only way that target of bringing net migration to the tens of thousands could be delivered would be at an extraordinary economic cost to the UK, and I don't believe any government would be willing to sign up for that. How have we got ourselves? How have we got ourselves, Mr. Deputy Speaker, into such a mess? I think the problem was hardwired in once David Cameron removed his MEPs from the main centre-right bloc in the European Parliament, because from that moment on, British influence in the EU was diminished. It was increasingly clear, unlike Conservative and Labour governments in the past, that the coalition and Conservative government in the UK were unable to get their way in the debates in the EU because their influence was so diminished. An example that I'm particularly aggrieved about is the failure of our government to protect the viability of cane sugar refining in the EU, as practised at the Tate and Lyle sugar refinery in my constituency. Previous governments, Labour and Conservative, were able to secure the future of cane sugar refining. This one tragically has failed, and that is a reflection of the loss of influence from the UK, the failure of the British government to achieve its objectives in negotiations in the UK. And of course the most spectacular failure of all was David Cameron's failure to secure a meaningful renegotiation in his last efforts as Prime Minister. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my conclusion is that what we actually need is a much more engaged British government able to win arguments in Brussels as previous British governments were able to. The failure of David Cameron's attempted renegotiation highlights very spectacularly just how big a problem has developed. But we shouldn't now be pulling out altogether, and I'll be opposing the second reading tomorrow night.